Hi, I'm back with some more of my thoughts on the story of Hagar. I'm finding this to be a very sad story and a very perplexing story in a lot of ways. It's not easy, really, to understand why this happened and how God is going to bring good out of this whole messy situation. And I know in the last session I had said we would move on to the New Testament talking about that mentions Hagar. But actually, as I was finishing up reading the story myself, I realized there's more to this story yet in Genesis 21. So I'm going to go to Genesis 21 today, and we're going to read about what happened when Isaac was born. Remember now, when Ishmael was born, Abraham was 86. And then when Ishmael was 13, that is when God came to Abraham and talked to him about the sign that he was going to give the Israeli nation. He wanted them all to be circumcised, and that was going to be a reminder of the covenant promise between him and Abraham and his descendants. So now it's a year later. Ishmael is 14, and Abraham is 100. So here's what happens in Genesis 21, starting right at the first verse. The Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. This happened at just the time God said it would, and Abraham named their son Isaac. 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God has commanded. Abraham was 100 years when Isaac was born. And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse a baby? Yet I have given Abraham a son in his old age. And that is the meaning of the word Isaac, is he who laughs. When Isaac grew up and was about to be weaned, now this would have been when Isaac was around 2 maybe. Okay, so 2 more years have gone by, so now Ishmael is 16 years old. When Isaac grew up and was about to be weaned, Abraham prepared a huge feast to celebrate the occasion. But Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant, Hagar, making fun of her son Isaac. Now think about this. This is a 16-year-old kid, man really, but still a boy really. And he has been treated like the heir for probably 14 years. And now Isaac has come along and he is now the covenant son. And this had to be a very difficult thing for Ishmael. And what he did was he struck out by being, foolish to making fun of, really, Isaac. And Sarah witnessed it. So she turned to Abraham and demanded, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son. He is not going to share the inheritance with my son Isaac. I won't have it." It seems as though this has been building up for a long time, doesn't it? And maybe this is just the excuse that Sarah needed, to get rid of Hagar and Ishmael. There again, she helped create this situation. Yes, Hagar went along with it. Yes, Abraham went along with it, but it was really Sarah's idea. And because she jumped the gun and tried to do for their family what God had said he would do, Sarah's just created a situation that is a mess. And there are going to be all kinds of long-term repercussions. It is so true of everything in our lives that when we make mistakes, yes, God can bring good out of it, but there will be consequences and repercussions, and there was here. And also, this is what's sad to me, is Ishmael is put in a situation where he has had the attention of his father all those years, and now the attention isn't on him, it's on Isaac. And so we've had a situation where, yes, he's been circumcised, yes, he's probably been taught by his father about God, but you can tell already that because of his personality and because of the situation that he's in, he's going to start making some bad choices. And in a lot of ways, we look at this, at least I do, and I say, this isn't Hagar's fault. This isn't Ishmael's fault. I guess that's one way to look at it, you know. The other way to look at it is Hagar has had intervention from God. She has found favor with God in terms of having a son and being promised generations. Ishmael has had a home life where he's had a father and he's part of a family. He would have seen his father probably worshiping God, or his father certainly would have talked about the covenant or talked about God. So they had those advantages, but what they did with them is something else. And that is very true of every person. We always have a choice. In a bad situation, we always have a choice to turn away from God or turn closer to God. And it just seems like Hagar and Ishmael, though, they had already run away once before Ishmael was born, and now Sarah wants to get rid of them again. And I just feel so sorry for them. I really do. But let's see what Abraham says. This upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son and he loved him, you know. I mean, that was his son. I mean, really, he's probably caught between a rock and a hard spot here, you know. He knows that Ishmael is not the covenant son. That's Isaac for sure, because God has told him. And his wife Sarah is saying he's got to go. So he's caught in the middle. And I don't think he knows quite what to do. But God intervenes. This is verse 12. God told Abraham, do not be upset over the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you to, for Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too. So everybody descended from Ishmael was Abraham's son, and everybody coming through the line of Isaac was also Abraham's son. Later on in the history of the children of Israel, if they are Jewish, they call themselves children of Abraham. And even as faith people, we are often called Abraham's sons and daughters, because Abraham was that first person that believed God and was rewarded for his faith, you know, and God counted his faith as righteousness. And so when we say he's Father Abraham and we're Abraham's sons, what we really mean is we are children of the covenant. Ishmael's descendants would also be from the line of Abraham, but from a spiritual sense, it doesn't seem like they embraced the one true God and really were children of Abraham in the spiritual sense. But Abraham does care about Ishmael, and God cares about Ishmael. He says, I'm going to make a nation out of the Ishmaelites. I'm going to bless Hagar with many generations and bless Ishmael with 12 sons that are going to be princes. So, since God gave him the green light, this is verse 14, Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food and a container of water, and strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. This seems quite harsh to me. He gave her a jug of water and some food and said, bye, go out in the wilderness. Maybe he really knew that God would protect her because God had said that he would bring nations out of Ishmael, who's only 16 at this point. When the water was gone, Hagar put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself 100 yards away. I don't want to watch the boy die, she said as she burst into tears. In a way, Hagar, once again, is just trying to escape from her problems. She doesn't go to God. She doesn't ask him to intervene. Now, the last time she was in the wilderness, God saved her, really. I mean, he sent the angel of the Lord, came to her and said, I hear you, and I'm going to make a great nation of you, and you've got to go back to Abraham and Sarah. This time, she's out in the wilderness again, but she doesn't call on the Lord. I just find that so sad, really, because Hagar at least knew of the Lord. Whether she knew him and followed him and had faith in him is another question. And the same with Ishmael. He would have known about God, but that doesn't mean he had faith in God. So basically, she and Ishmael are, dying of thirst, basically. And Ishmael at this point could barely move, and she lays him down under a bush. And instead of staying there, she said, I can't bear to watch him die. I'm going to go 100 yards away and just sit down. So I can't bear to watch him. And she's just crying. But God heard the boy crying. So notice, God is watching over, not only watching over Hagar, but he's watching over Ishmael. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said, Hagar, what's wrong? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants. He's telling her again, good can still come out of this. You can have a whole family. Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness, and he became a skillful archer, and he settled in the wilderness of Paran. His mother arranged for him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt. Unfortunately, Hagar herself is probably from Egypt. And I guess, see, here again, I can understand this two ways, can't you? Like, in some ways, if she knew about the fact that Ishmael was a descendant of Abraham, he'd been circumcised, he was part of the Jewish nation, she probably should have gotten a Jewish wife for him. However, she herself was Egyptian. So it just makes sense that she went back to Egypt and got an Egyptian woman for him to marry. But by marrying an Egyptian woman, that meant that really they became even more of a pagan nation. And as Ishmael had children, and he had 12, just like the 12 tribes of Israel, there are 12 tribes from Ishmael. And they all count themselves, even in modern days, they all say they are from the line of Abraham. And most of the Ishmaelites became modern day, really, Arabs, and they lived a nomadic life, and they lived in the Arabian area, and they were hostile to the Jews from the beginning. This whole thing has caused centuries, really, of discontent because of the fact that Sarah and Abraham and Hagar conspired to do something that God had already said he was going to do. So they did it man's way instead of God's way. It's an extremely sad story. It's a story of chances and choices that people made that led them into all kinds of issues and problems. And some of the sad things I was writing down, I wrote down a couple of things of why do I feel this is such a sad story? Well, first of all, Hagar was a slave, a servant in that household. And so no matter what happened, because she was a slave, her son was never going to be the covenant son. even though for 13 years or 14 years he probably felt like he was being treated like he was. Also, it's so sad that when she got pregnant, that she treated Sarah with contempt, that she looked down on her, that she wasn't, loving and happy that they were going to make a great big happy family. No, she was very nasty, really, to Sarah. And then, of course, later, Sarah humiliated her and treated her harshly. So there's a lot going on here that was just not very kind or gentle or nice at all. You know, the other thing that was sad to me is God was with her the first time she ran away, but yet what he told her is go back, submit. And that's kind of hard and harsh. And the other thing that's sad to me is, Ishmael was circumcised at age 13, part of that family of a descendant of Abraham. But at 14 years, suddenly Isaac arrives. And suddenly everything changes. Up until then, the Bible is very clear that Abraham really still thought Ishmael was the son that was going to fulfill the covenant. And finally, when God reveals the circumcision part of the covenant, he tells him in no uncertain terms, it's not Ishmael. It's not Ishmael. But for 13 years, Abraham believed it was Ishmael. So he probably treated him that way. And this must have been very sad and very difficult for Ishmael to suddenly be, not the only son. And even though God heard Hagar and she was visited by God and also saved by him in the wilderness, we aren't really sure if she truly believed in God or believed in the covenant promises of salvation. It would be faith that would save her. And it doesn't seem like she really, even the second time she went out in the wilderness, she didn't have that faith to call out to God. And he had already been there in the wilderness with her and saved her once. So I don't know. I don't understand it. But I do think that Hagar and Ishmael got some bad breaks. They got some bad breaks in life. Lots of people get bad breaks in life, though. It's what they do with it that counts. And God still was with them, even in the wilderness, even though they were treated harshly, even though got some bad things happen to them. I think we always have to remember that. I know I have reached a point in my life where there was a time in my life, let's say many, many years ago, where there was a short moment where I really felt like God had abandoned me. And that is a horrible feeling. But at that point, we always have two choices. We always can turn back and say, no, God, I know you, you're faithful, you're not going to abandon me. Or we can believe what our own thoughts are telling us and turn the opposite way and become bitter and resentful. And it seems like that's what Hagar and Ishmael have become, which is very sad, even though we all can attest to the fact that they had it tough and some bad things happened to them. What was done to them shouldn't have been done to a dog, But God was also protecting them when he separated them, when he sent Ishmael and Hagar out into the wilderness. He was protecting Isaac and Ishmael, because it never would have really worked with all of them there together. There would have been, especially with Ishmael having such a temper and being such a fighter, there may have been, and he was so much older than Isaac, God was protecting Isaac by sending Ishmael away. And also, in a way, protecting Ishmael from the treatment that Sarah would have given, So whenever we are in a bad situation that is not of our own making, it's easy to choose the path of bitterness. Easy to choose the path of bitterness. It's easy to say, well, God's abandoned me, I might as well abandon him, And that is the human way, isn't it? God is calling us to something higher than that. He's saying, if you stick with me, despite the fact that you've been dealt a bad hand, I'll bring blessing. And he has said to Hagar and Ishmael, you're in the wilderness, but guess what? You're going to have a huge family. You're going to have all kinds of blessings. But I think there is something, even though part of me and probably part of you says, you know what? That's not fair. It doesn't seem fair. What happened to Hagar and Ishmael doesn't seem fair, you know. Life isn't always fair. And when people make mistakes, they create situations that affect other people, and it isn't fair. But God has said, I am faithful, and I will be there for you and bring good out of every situation. There's nothing too big for God. So, I don't know. I like I said at the very beginning of these sessions, I was kind of timid about taking on Hagar because this is a complicated story, and it isn't a story where everything's totally black and white to our human minds, you know, but it is a story of God's faithfulness. I mean, faithfulness to Abraham, faithfulness to Sarah, faithfulness to Hagar, faithfulness to Ishmael, even when they all made mistakes. And the covenant was never about you do X, Y, and Z and then you'll be blessed. The covenant was never about somebody doing something to earn it, because there's nothing we can do to earn it. There's nothing we can do to earn salvation. The covenant was always a gift. And God's presence and faithfulness is always a gift. So next time we're going to see where Hagar is mentioned symbolically in the New Testament. So until then, I hope you have a wonderful day.